back again this evening. He's given us some of his time and presentations in the past. I just say very briefly, welcome to everyone for joining us. I think we have around 20 people, which is a very, 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 very good response. And you've got a varied presentation which Martin will be giving. Be very interesting. I suggest we'll leave all the questions until the end. If you could, when you want to ask a question, just use your sign hand icon at the top of the screen, and Andrew and Charlie will be looking out for anyone who has questions. We'll have the Q&A session after Martin's spoken. Martin will give us a presentation of about 30 or 40 minutes, which is the norm. And then we'll have some question and answers, and I'll have a few words just to say at the end to thank Martin and also brief you on the forthcoming events. But enough from me. Let me hand the screen over to Martin, and we'll take it from there. Martin, thank you for joining us. It's all yours.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Charlie. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Anglo-Thai Society for inviting me to give this talk on my research today. I feel very honored indeed. I do, of course, hope that you will enjoy my presentation and find it interesting. I also hope that you have had a chance to watch the two films that we have asked you to watch as preparation for today's talk. If you have, great. If you haven't, my belay. It's not a problem at all. I hope that my talk will still make sense and be interesting, and then actually make you even more curious to watch the two films and also the other films that have emerged from this research project. I will talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we have time for questions. And I'm, of course, also quite keen to learn what you think about my research and the way we have been trying to disseminate our research findings more effectively and make them more impactful. During my talk, I will show you two short films that also emerged from my ongoing research project. I hope that this will allow me to show more effectively what my research is about and what I want to achieve with my research. In a few minutes, I will show you the first film, which is in fact a teaser for our most recent video on Buddhist performing arts. It was published on YouTube only half a year ago. But before I do so, I thought it would be useful to give you some background on my research. Over the last 20 years or so, I've been researching various aspects of Thai Buddhism, and since 2008, one of my major interests in my study of Thai Buddhism has been to study the biographies, spiritual practice, and teaching and veneration of historical female Buddhist practitioners. As part of this research, I've also been looking into higher education for Buddhist women and the still ongoing debates surrounding the full ordination of women in Thai Theravada Buddhism. Thus, I've been conducting in-depth interviews with Buddhist monks, intellectuals, social activists, and of course, female practitioners. I've also done a lot of textual analysis and archival research. In this area of my research, I've increasingly focused on Thai Metis. Here I should maybe explain a little bit more about Thai Metis for those of you who may not be familiar with this form of female renunciation in Thai Buddhism. In the absence of an officially recognized Theravada order of fully ordained nuns, the so-called Bhikkhuni in Thailand, Thai women have pursued other forms of Buddhist renunciation. From eyewitness accounts from Western visitors of Ayutthaya, we know that Metis have existed for at least 400 years. Metis spiritual practice is undoubtedly the most well-known and widely practiced way of female renunciation in Thailand. Metis wear white robes, shave their head and eyebrows, and are also characterized by their practice of keeping the 8 or 10 Buddhist precepts. Despite their long existence and repeated attempts to gain a clearly defined legal status as monastics, Metis are still not consistently legally recognized as ordained persons, as nakbua. This is one of the major reasons as to why their socio-religious status, roles, and identity are blurred and are rather varied across the country. While male monks, pra or piku, are registered with the state and enjoy social privileges and religious status, mechis are not recognized in the same way. They occupy a marginalized status. There are approximately 20,000 of these mechis in Thailand. Now, in my research, I have investigated the ways in which these women, and in particular these mechis, have made important contributions to dark Thai Buddhist teaching and practice, and also monasticism, despite the many significant disadvantages they have been facing. Now, having given you a little bit of background, let me show you the first of the two films I want to show you today. Good. So a few years ago, and as part of this larger ongoing research project I just described, together with the independent Thai scholar Nalit Jalatanyawong, I was able to overturn the incorrect scholarship attribution of a key Thai Buddhist text, which is widely known in Thai Buddhism with the title Dhamma Nuthamma Patipatti. Dhamma Nuthamma Dhamma Patipatti can be translated as into English as practice in perfect conformity with the Dhamma, that is the Buddha's teaching. Dhamma Nuthamma Patipatti was originally printed anonymously between 1932 and 1934 as separate, altogether 5 texts. All the 5 sections of Dhamma Nuthamma Patipatti consist of dialogues in the question and answer style called Pucha Visachana. It is, however, not clear as to who is involved in the dialogues and to which extent these discussions may be based on or reflect real conversations. Whilst the sentences are rather simple and short in their structure, they reflect deep experiences in the practice of the Dhamma, the Buddha's teaching, and at the same time, an impressive and comprehensive knowledge of Buddhist Pali canonical scriptures and teachings. Here we can see a picture of these first editions printed in the first half of the 1930s. Copies of the first printed editions are very difficult to find nowadays. This is perhaps no surprise, as only an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 copies of each of these first 5 editions were produced, and most of them then probably distributed to monasteries for free. They contain no preface or foreword, and no author is mentioned. Now, for at least the last 35 years, if not much longer, these very texts of Dhamma Nuthamma Patipatti have been attributed to Luang Pu Man Puritato, who lived from 1870 to 1949. And at the moment, we do not know how and why this has happened. I'm sure that many of you have already heard, read about, or seen images of Luang Pu Man. Without any doubt, he is one of Thailand's most famous, most revered, and most influential monks. And he has been revered by many Thai Buddhists as a fully awakened saint, and has been more recently recognized by UNESCO as an eminent person. Here are some examples of editions where the text of Dhamma Nuthamma Patipatti were ascribed to Luang Pu Man, even though he actually never claimed to have written or even been involved in the production of these texts. So here we see some of these covers, book covers, where the texts were put into the mouth of Luang Pu Man. I mean, here you see the covers of the earliest editions of the texts that we have been able to find so far that ascribe the authorship of these very texts to Luang Pu Man. However, after a few years of archival research, textual analysis, and numerous interviews, and maybe most importantly, gaining access to Kiing Damrong Thammasan's extremely rare cremation book, Nalit and I have been able to definitely demonstrate that the texts of Dhamma Nuthamma Patipatti were in fact authored by the hitherto little-known devout Buddhist woman Kiing Damrong Thammasan Yai Visit Sili, who lived from 1882 to 1944. You will find some more details about our research and how we did this and the obstacles we faced in our film Lost in the Mists of Time that we ask you to watch in advance of today's talk. Born in 1882, Kiing Damrong Thammasan was a noblewoman. She had a deep interest in the study and practice of Buddhist teaching since a very young age. We know that she already pursued in-depth study of Buddhist teaching before she became even a teenager. She also had what was regarded as an astonishing memory, having been able to memorize a rather large amount of canonical Buddhist texts in their Thai translation and also in the original Pali language. Here you can see Kiing Rama V with her husband, who was a judge. Kiing Rama V's family must have been very rich. In Bangkok's Chinatown, Kiing Rama V and her husband owned the tallest building of its kind in Thailand at that time, a 7-story building that still stands today. And you can see here on this picture, they owned much more property and made very generous donations to a number of Buddhist monasteries. Kiing Rama V was a student of the enormously influential and high-ranking monk Somdet Praputa Kosatan Dalern Yanatwaro, the then abbot of the famous Bangkok monastery Wat Thep Silin. Kiing Rama V gained much of her impressive knowledge through regularly listening to the sermon of Somdet Praputa Kosatan and also through personal conversations and instructions from him. Here you can see the ordination hall board of the monastery Wat Thamikaram that she, Kiing Rama V, and her husband started to build in the south of Thailand in Prachuap Khiri Khan in the 1920s. In 1933, Kiing Rama V was ordained as a Maechi by her teacher Somdet Praputa Kosatan and remained in the white robes of a Maechi until her death in 1944. Following the identification of Kiing Rama V as the real author of the Dhamma Nuthamma Patipati texts, Nalit and I then published a new edition of Dhamma Nuthamma Patipati, now of course with the correct authorial attribution and a new title, Damrong Tham. Being deeply fascinated by the hugely impressive scholarship and the spiritual practice and biography of Kiing Rama V, we have since then conducted further research into her life and spiritual practice. And doing so came across additional texts which may also have been composed by Kiing Rama V. Although with these texts we are not, at least at the moment, able to prove the authorship definitely. Anyway, being deeply impressed by the profound and comprehensive knowledge of the Buddha's teaching these texts are obviously based on, and also their literary style, we published these texts as 2 further edited volumes and given them the titles Hat Tham and Tong Tham. Whilst doing research on the authorship of the Hat Tham texts, I learned that when the famous Thai Buddhist monk Buddhadasa Bhikkhu Puttathát was one of the editors of a Buddhist newspaper, Putta Sasana, some chapters of Hat Tham were published in this very Buddhist newspaper in the late 1930s. The newspaper editor's introduction to the Hat Tham chapters reads, direct quotation, "It is hoped that the readers actually derive enjoyment too, similar to watching a play," end of quotation. And it was this very sentence that inspired us to use performances as a route to public engagement with the texts of our 3 edited volumes, their content and the many questions they ask in particular, but not only with regard to the role of women in Thai Buddhism. Being so deeply fascinated by these texts and seeing their importance and their huge potential to prompt and inspire people to rethink gender roles, our aim has been to develop an innovative form of Buddhist pedagogy. Here, I should mention that Thai Buddhist teaching, traditionally at least, focuses on sermons, mostly given by monks, and also textual study, while performances are predominantly reserved for telling stories of the Buddha. However, with our performances, we wanted to do something else, something new. That is, using a devised theatre performance accompanied by music in order to explore religious insights, and quite importantly, having female characters at the center of the play. Doing so, we hoped will enable us to develop an alternative means of engaging with Buddhist teachings, particularly for younger Thai Buddhists who may perceive traditional forms of Buddhist pedagogy as of little relevance to their own religious practice and study of Buddhist teaching. What then followed was the development of a number of devised theatre performances that were based on texts by Kunying Damlong Thammasat and texts we believe may also have been authored by her. During the first of the two projects, we worked with Thai students of performing arts and music from the Thai University, Burapha University. We also worked with several professional Thai actors and lecturers of performing arts. As just mentioned, here we use devising theatre as a collaborative process to develop our performances. Devising theatre involves performers directly in the production process, taking into account their responses to the texts and building their experiences directly into the performance. It thus offers a way of helping performers and then also, of course, audiences to revise their understanding, in this case, of Thai Buddhist ideas, beliefs, and practices, and most importantly, women's contributions. We have developed the scripts, production, and direction in workshops with Thai academics, students, and professional actors. This then led to the production of performances presenting a female teacher and her female pupils learning about and debating the Dhamma, the Buddhist teaching, together. Thus, we use texts from the book Hat Tham and Damrong Tham as a stimuli to encourage our actors, actresses, and musicians to explore, experiment with, and express their individual ideas and experiences in relation to gender in Buddhism, traditional Buddhist pedagogy, and Buddhist teaching and language, which is often believed to be difficult or even inaccessible to the general lay public. I have found that this process of integrating interdisciplinary forms of art in order to express one's life's experiences is very powerful, enjoyable, and at the same time insightful, a way of engaging with these texts that I had become so familiar with, having read them lots of times and having been the editor of these texts. Thus, our performers and musicians express their ideas in dance, singing, body language, and music. During this creative process of making the performances and its dynamics in the relationships between the performers, the directors, musicians, and us as Buddhist study scholars, I learned a lot about Thai Buddhism and also about the texts of which I thought I already had understood them quite well. Here you can see how we translated chapter 20 of the Hat Tham text with the title, Teacher and Pupils Talk with Abbot Sense Object and the Novices About the Four Noble Truths into Buddhist performing arts. So I want to show you some 7 or 8 minutes, one particular scene of how this translation process worked, getting these texts through the interpretation of these young people into a style, into a form that speaks to Buddhist society as it is at the moment. So I hope this works now. Good. So this was one of the chapters that we, out of the 41 chapters of the book Hattam, that we translated through performing arts into this form. But what was also interesting for me to observe, both in the process of making these plays and their public performances, was that using allegorical narrative, as we have just seen here, can be a powerful tool in making people engage with Buddhist doctrines, as this makes the study of Buddhist teaching enjoyable and interactive, very unlike maybe the textual study of a dry Buddhist textbook. It became clear that using allegory and the personification of religious ideas, ideals, and aspirations can facilitate the acquisition of knowledge of what may often be perceived as abstruse concepts. Through allegory, complex teachings and concepts become concrete and tangible. This has been demonstrated, I believe, in the scene you just watched, as an innovative and interactive way of teaching the rather complex Buddhist teaching of the six senses, the six novices. In Pali, the six senses are called ayatana. And of course, as we have seen, the core Buddhist teaching of the Four Noble Truths, Ariyasatsi. The four performances we developed were presented before mostly urban, educated audiences at the Thai University, Burapha, and the Thammasat University in Bangkok in 2018 and 2019, respectively. And then, of course, the prestigious Buddhadasa Indabanyo Archives Foundation in Bangkok. We had two performances here, 2018 and 2019. Not having been familiar with the power of devising theatre, what was hugely surprising to me as well was that these performances had an important impact not only on the audience, something we of course wanted to achieve, but also on the directors and the performers themselves. The director of the 2018 performances felt, for example, that for the performers, creative engagement with the text had, direct quotation, changed their understanding of and developed a more positive view on Buddhism, end of quotation. The director of the 2019 performances commented that the process of putting together the play, combined with her spiritual practice, was, direct quotation, the best learning of the Dhamma in her entire life, end of quotation. As for the impact on the audiences, the results of the post-showed questionnaires that we distributed to the audiences and asked them to fill in showed also that some 60% of the altogether 234 respondents felt that their understanding of gender in Buddhism had changed as a result of watching the performances. One member of the audience, for example, commented that, direct quotation, "I'm now more interested in the role of women in both the history and the practice of Buddhism," end of quotation. Another audience member wrote, direct quotation now, "It has filled me with sheer joy to see a play made up of women who communicated the teachings very clearly," end of quotation. Needless to say, this was, of course, brilliant and very encouraging feedback for us. The success of this innovative approach of Buddhist pedagogy was also confirmed by the responses we gained from the audiences. 220 out of 234 respondents, that is some 94%, strongly agreed that the performing arts was an effective tool for teaching Buddhist doctrine. Thus, we received comments such as that the play had enabled them to understand Buddhism in a new positive way and was very applicable to the modern era and had inspired them to read about and study Buddhism further. One audience member wrote, direct quotation, "I never thought that a Buddha's teaching could be taught through a play. Thank you for showing me that plays can be an effective tool in spreading the Dhamma," end of quotation. As mentioned, another major objective of these projects was, of course, also to challenge preconceived ideas of gender within Thai Buddhism and the presumed and the showing of the mistaken and correct authorship of the major texts in Damrong Tham have here been quite powerful, of course, in this regard. After all, the presumed author, the famous Manglo Buman, has been widely considered and revered in Thailand as a fully awakened being. Thus, our disclosure of the actual author's identity as female gives justification for women's ability to accede to the highest spiritual goal of nirvana, which may sometimes be, or even is very often believed to be reserved for fully ordained male monks only. Thus, Kiing Rama V, her spiritual practice, her incredible knowledge of Buddhist scriptures, and her biography provide inspiration and motivation for women today to practice towards the same spiritual achievements and goals. This also has been confirmed through feedback we gained after the performances. Thus, a leading Mechi and committee member of the National Thai Mechi Institute remarks that our discovery about the real authorship of Dhammanuttamma Patipatti, direct quotation, has been very important and impactful for us Mechis, who have become deeply inspired and encouraged in their work for society and want to follow the footsteps of Kiing Rama V, end of quotation. Another Mechi and meditation teacher, having viewed one of the performances based on these texts, commented, direct quotation, "Discovering that this text was really written by a woman has filled my heart with motivation and joy. The more I read about the biography of Kiing Rama V, the more impressed I became, and the more it inspired my own spiritual practice," end of quotation. Now, learning about the impact our research and performances has of course been hugely rewarding and created a lot of joy in us. Thank you for your attention and time, and I now look forward to your questions.
Let me just start, Martin, by thanking you and giving us an insight into the amount of research and time you've put into this, which is actually considerable, but to see the positive response that you've got from putting on these performances. I mean, that must be very satisfying to yourself as well, just to see that. And I hope that is having a positive effect, in, as you say, on the gender side, that actually the Machi are now there's a greater acceptance now, and that this is beginning to come place. But it's a great deal of credit to you and your colleagues for undertaking that in the first place. But let me see if anyone has any questions for you, because people who perhaps have a greater understanding of Buddhism and the background, they may well wish to raise various points with you. Andrew, are there any questions in the box? Angela McCleary. We'll start with Angela. Angela, please go ahead and ask Martin your question.
Well, firstly, thank you, Martin, very much. It's been absolutely fascinating. I did my homework. I did look at the links, and it was really, really insightful before your fantastic talks. I'm greatly admiring your work and your dedication over 20 years. It's fantastic. So just really, I've got two questions, but I'll just kick off with one. In your historical research into the female voice within Buddhism discourse, do you think that as time progresses, the female voice has become more or less audible?
Thank you, Angela. Nice to see you, by the way.
Nice to see you too.
Very many years now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think things have changed quite significantly over the last at least 20, 30 years. I mean, in my research, I actually found out that it seems, at least as far as the sources allow us to say, that these women have been around for a long time. And I say a long time, we have evidence for at least 100, 120, 40 years. Which of course is not surprising. This is really when printing took off in Thailand, and very often, of course, we have to read between the lines, because women normally would not allow biographies to be written about them. They would normally be very careful to disseminate, distribute their teaching, their printed work with their name. I mean, Kiing Rama V is a very good example for that. Despite her enormous knowledge and the very many admirers that she had, she published her text anonymously. But we have been able to uncover quite a lot of these biographies, early biographies. So it's certainly the case that women have had an enormous impact on Thai Buddhism for a long time, despite these many imbalances that I described at the beginning of my talk, and about which I could, of course, talk much more. However, what really has changed is that I think it's more publicly and widely acknowledged during the last 40 years. This is due, I would say, through publications. So women have now been publishing more of their work under their real name. There have been the building of various sites of veneration, in particular in the Thai forest tradition, where we have now an increasing number of sites of veneration for women who are believed to have achieved the highest goal in Buddhism, nirvana, and fantastic sites. And then also in the urban context, an increasing number of women and female sermonizers or meditation masters. So it seems to be changing, but still, I mean, when we compare the number of, say, famous charismatic women, it's still a rather low number when compared to those of monks. And this, of course, is also confirmed quite easily when you go into, say, a bookstore. You know, you find easily lots and lots of biographies and sermon texts printed by famous monks, and it's still rather rare to find equivalent texts about or by women. You know, but I certainly do believe that things have been changing quite a lot.
Great, thank you.
Your second question, Angela?
Oh, okay. So I was looking at the writing of Kiing Yai. I can't pronounce her other name, I'm afraid.
Well, it was already pretty good.
But it is you're basically converting a contemplative written work into performance art. So the individual, whether it's a reader or the audience, they need to employ a different skill set. So from quiet, introspective, personal reading, which is very, very personal to themselves, to actually a visual listening skills through a third party or parties portraying their interpretation of the text and its essence. So do you think that there are advantages to this in presenting the work, perhaps to a wider, less knowledgeable audience? And are there other works which lend themselves to play?
Oh, very good question. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I think, I mean, I was talking about quite a lot of different texts, basically. I mean, as you can see here on this slide, last slide here, I mean, there were the texts that we do know for sure now have been authored by Kiing Rama V, these dialogical texts, which are, I have to say, quite difficult when you read them. they're full of quotations from the Pali canonical scriptures in the Pali language, and then giving the translation thereof. And really fascinating and deep texts. I mean, I had been studying these texts still in the belief that they were authored by this famous monk. You know, for me it was a big surprise personally to learn this, but I have always been, for a very long time, when I was a monk myself, been fascinated by these texts. And it was very clear to me that these are not ordinary texts, not textbook-like descriptions or interpretations of the Buddhist teaching, but they are also clearly based on deep insights as a result of long-term meditation or spiritual practice. So clearly these texts are difficult, and I myself, I wouldn't say that I fully understood them. Probably you need to be enlightened to do so, I'm not sure. But then there are the other texts, Hattam, the text you see here in the middle, the cover thereof, where we took the play that you just saw from, which is more accessible, I think, because it's funny. It's the personifications of different aspirations and spiritual practice. So it's rather accessible, you know. And these texts are actually quite interestingly older. So these texts were already authored during the time of Rama V. So at the beginning of the 20th century, the first 10 years thereof. And they showed women who engage with the Dhamma in a very enjoyable and also relaxed way. So they're quite unusual. I've never seen anything like it before. And it really, when I read the text, I said, yeah, I have to see that. I mean, they invite you to really imagine them, and that's probably the power of the text. And then, of course, the idea prompted by this quote from Buddha Tat that I also referred to, that really made me, yeah, I want to do that. I want to experiment with that, and also try to really find a new language for these texts. I mean, and when I did so with these young people, BA students of performing arts from Burapha University, I have to say it was quite challenging for that. And I think I'm now starting to answer your question, because the language is a language that is 120 years old, and it's also a Dhammic language with a lot of specific terminology and also again quotations from the Pali scriptures, etc. At the same time, it's really fun, you know, to watch it. The little novice, you know, or novices, the six thereof, are representing the senses, the six senses in Buddhism, and the abbot interacting with it, and the relations with these women who are very inquisitive and challenging the knowledge. They're not just saying ka, yes, 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 but they're really having challenging questions, you know, where the monks have to say that, well, I cannot really answer that at the moment, you know. And so to see how these texts were brought to life and then powerful in interaction with the audiences was, as I mentioned, really, yeah, enormously rewarding. And I think there's much more to do. So I want to do more, and we have had other performances planned, but then of course, because of the pandemic, we're not able to realize them as of yet. But I hope still that we will at some point. And then of course, explore this further, what you said, to this translation process of getting a text into a visual performance with all kinds of forms of expression. Like, it's not only of course the speech, but also the body language. I mean, I was impressed how through body language these young women, our actresses, were able to express their ideas, very often preconceived ideas about Buddhism, you know, and then challenge these. And this was a very interesting process.
I think we've got another question for you,
okay.
Martin. Chris, I think, or Chris or Philip, I'm not sure who's asking it, but go ahead. Unmute yourself, Chris.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Thank you. Well, from Philip and I, thank you very much to Steve and all the organisers at ATS, and for Professor Martin's presentation today. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. A very interesting take on the Buddhist studies. And I suppose my question, you might accuse me of being a bit tangential, but it's really about the study of Buddhism and Asia and Thailand in Europe and the UK. So I'm intrigued by this fact that there's only 2 places in the UK where you can study the Thai language at university level, and that's SOAS, where I did some elementary study, and also University of Leeds, where of course Professor Martin is there and doing this great work. So I just wondered, there must be a reason for that. Why is it only located in 2 parts of the UK, and bits that I don't see a logical connection.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, SOAS obviously has a very long history, and in Leeds we only rather recently started with Thai studies, that is in 2004. And I mean, I guess to give a short answer, I mean, it's simply that there are not that many young 17, 18 years old who are so much interested in Thailand that they would invest 3-4 years of their time and a lot of money in tuition fees on the study thereof. But when they do so, I mean, they are incredibly enthused about it, about the study of Thailand, and very often, and this is the joy of a teacher, see that there is much more to Thailand than they may have thought. There's a vast literature and culture and so forth. And this is, I think, one of my big aims, if you like, to really show this to wider society, that Thailand has so much to offer, rather than only beaches and delicious food, etc. In terms of literature and culture, and especially in my case, a Buddhist culture, it's such a fascinating and multifaceted country with an enormously interesting history. And this is kind of message, I think, has to be taken out and propagated more widely and more effectively in order to really show the value of studying a course like that.
See, the questions are coming thick and fast now, Martin. I'll let Andrew know who's next.
Isaac next.
Tim Isaac. Tim, go ahead.
Martin, thank you very much indeed for your talk. I have to confess that, unlike Angela, I'm not a good student. I hadn't viewed the films properly. My question, I suppose, is I started to think, or asked myself, and so now I'm asking you, whether you think there are any parallels that could be drawn with the presentation of teachings, in this case, in this talk, Buddhist teachings, and with the performing arts, and Christianity with medieval mystery plays, which is also kind of populist, if you like. And if I'm using that word a little bit extravagantly, it's because it leads on to the second part of my question, which is to ask whether there are any parts of the Buddhist establishment, the monastic establishment, that would frown upon such popularization.
Well,
it isn't quite doing it justice.
Yeah, I mean, again, thank you for your questions, and very interesting questions. And I have to admit, I have to think more about this. I'm not able to give an answer to that at the moment. As I said, it's also just the beginning of these projects, and we are just started to explore. But as you may have seen, I think we tried to do something very clever. We invited high-ranking monks to the performances as well. We knew it was something new. We knew it may have been something that some people may perceive as provocative, and therefore, through various connections, we invited 2 high-ranking and popular monks who supported this. And in the other video, you may have also seen Ajahn Sulak Sivarak, who also very much supported this project from the beginning. And then, of course, the framework we chose was the Buddhadasa archives, which again gives another framework or justification for this kind of play to happen. And this all worked really surprisingly well. I mean, we got only positive feedback, and there was a demand. I mean, people asked us to do more of it, and I think there's a huge potential to explore here, to really develop what I said, more innovative, and therefore also maybe more effective ways of Buddhist pedagogy and present these ideas. And these are, in a way, not new ideas. I mean, these are old ideas and practices. As I mentioned, Kiing Rama V Thammasat, and she was not the only one woman of her time. They were actually supported by high-ranking monks. Maybe we think it's something new, but again, I would say, based on my research, that there have always been high-ranking, influential monks who have been very supportive of women and given them individual feedback and encouragement and teaching and so forth. But maybe what is missing is the awareness thereof. And this is, I think, where my research tries to change that, where I want to show these very many women and their incredible achievement in Buddhist studies, and that this has been around for a while. But again, I always have to be careful. I'm not denying here that there are these significant gender imbalances. After all, as I mentioned right at the beginning of my talk, right to this day, women cannot be fully ordained in Thai Buddhism. At least they are officially then not recognized as fully ordainned female monks, so-called bhikkhuni, and thus this alternative form of female monasticism has developed in Thailand over the last 400 or 500 years at least. And there are still a lot of things that are where there are significant disadvantages for women here. So it's a complex picture here, I think, that we see. And I think this is also another major objective of this research, simply showing that there is this enormous diversity. When we talk about Thai Buddhism, this doesn't really exist. There are Thai Buddhisms. We have to investigate individual biographies, individual monastic histories, in order to better understand these complexities and the complex relationship between genders.
Trying to squeeze a few more questions in for you, Martin. Charlie's had her hand up for a while. Charlie, have you got a question?
I do. Hi, Martin, and thanks so much for your talk and your presentation. It was great. It made me feel like I was back at Leeds 10 years ago. Lovely. I obviously, before I studied Thai, I studied a lot of theatre studies and drama, and a lot worked for a company that did a lot of TIE, theatre in education. And watching the clips and having seen the YouTube videos that you sent prior to this presentation, I could see a lot of similarities and parallels to the using the Dharma teachings, a bit like teachings, a bit like Tim suggested, in a similar way to Christian teachings and Bible stories being used in the curriculum in drama for primary and secondary schools. I wondered if you would envisage, like, down the line, the Dharma and kind of dramatic performing arts performances coming together as part of a Thai curriculum, and if that's something that you think would be a beneficial part of the Thai education system.
Absolutely, yeah, that would be wonderful. I mean, as I said, I mean, we're just at the beginning and experimenting with it, and it was, I had no background in performing arts. I know nothing about it really. I just start to now, and started to read a little bit more. And even devising theatre, this was very new to me. When we actually did it, I learned about it only through doing it. And it was really this only sentence by Buddhadasa that inspired me to do that. I simply wanted to see it. I saw it in front of my eyes, but I thought it can be a very powerful thing to do. And it was also very enjoyable at the same time, not only for me, but also for, of course, the performers and the audiences. And I think it is, or can be indeed, a powerful tool for Buddhist pedagogy. I mean, it was so insightful and actually overwhelming to talk to these young people, you know, to sit down in these workshops that we organized with them and read these texts together and learn from them. And as I think I mentioned already, over the course of doing so, I think I better understood the texts themselves through having another view of these young people and with their other ways of interpreting, giving sense to these very texts, you know, that I have even thought about. So yeah, I think there's much to explore and a lot of potential there. and I certainly want to do that.
Just a couple of
using the different arts, like music, and equally, like Tim touched upon, the kind of populist way that, you know, Bible stories, we see everything from, you know, children's nativity shows to, you know, Jesus Christ Superstar, which every time I watch that, even though I've read the Bible in school, I will still take something away from watching Jesus Christ Superstar that I didn't get from the text of studying in school. So I think it's yeah, really fascinating to see how the Dharma can be used as a basis for that kind of art expression, and yeah, especially for the next generation, and how it can develop. I think it was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Just, I think there's a couple more quick ones for you. Marie, did you have your hand up? Marie? I'm not sure if you did. If you didn't, Andrew, is there
I haven't seen any
questions?
more. I haven't seen any more hands, Steve.
No more hands. No more hands. Well, if there aren't any more hands, I mean, there have been plenty of hands up, which is good. Let me just say, Martin, thank you once again. I mean, I think it'd be good once we can all get past the pandemic, and you can get back on further. I'm just sure you're carrying on with your research, but you can get back into Thailand again and follow up with this, because it's had quite a lot of traction already, which is excellent. So thank you once again.